This is, just say this is take 2. Jean-Louis take 2.
This is Jean-Louis tape 2.
Great.
We're at the point where we had cleared the lot, cut the logs, had them milled, and we bring the logs on site and lay them all out for size, because we're going to build this log cabin and start with the larger logs at the bottom. The only hired help that we had at this point was an older gentleman who was retired, a lumberjack, who was very good with an axe and saws. And there was Bernard, there was Dad, Papa, and myself when we were doing the actual lumbering work. But this camp of this size, we had to decide on what kind of foundation we were going to make, and again, I had no financial resources. I'm in college, and Mom and Dad had no resources. Ben and I had limited resources. My brother, the Franciscan, obviously didn't have financial resources. He lives on begging, right? But Ben is very creative and would never back away from hard labor. And Lee Neal took his vacation from the monastery, came over here, and we started doing pick and shovel. Ben, Lee Neal, Papa, myself, I'm in college, strong young man supposedly, and we get into pick and shovels, and you're hitting roots, you're hitting, we're not hiring a backhoe here.
Yeah, explain to me what the earth was like.
Well, you start off with a soft topsoil where the trees are, but then you have to cut the roots and remove the stumps with old hatchets, and then you get down to below the soft soil, and where we were hoping to hit sand, we did not hit sand, we hit clay. And Banna's big dream was to have a large fireplace in this camp. The camp at this point had been designed through the last couple of years. He and I, I guess, primarily were the ones to do the paperwork about what this camp would look like. And he wanted a large fireplace, stone fireplace. And the stones had not been hauled in at this point yet. We had to create a foundation. No backhoes, no money. Hand and pick shovels. Well, after we get down 4 or 5 feet, we're really into clay. And you have weather like we've been having this week and rain periodically, and this clay turns into like a quicksand. And my oldest brother, Lee Neal, is getting down to his knees shoveling this wet clay, and he now can't get out, and we put logs across this big hole, and we try to grab him, and he loses at least one boot, if not both. He loses both his boots that are probably still down there. We eventually, I believe, waited for dry weather. We did as much digging as we could, but we were just not reaching lake bottom where there should be sand. And so we let it go for a few days. I mean, it's getting dangerous. It actually is getting dangerous. And Ben hired a farmer with a couple of young boys and us to go tear down stone walls. And we, on a flatbed, these are potato trucks, they're not even dump trucks, they're potato trucks, flatbed trucks, and we pile these rocks 2 or 3 loads at least. This takes several days. And we dumped this rock into this wet clay, and I can tell you the first load went down like landing into
suction cup.
Yep, it was just a wet clay. It went down and never saw the rocks. And the second load went down a little slower, and the third load we finally started seeing the top of rocks. And I believe we brought in a 4th load so that now these rocks had settled on the sandy bottom of the lake. Obviously 40, 50 feet away from the lake, but we hit bottom. And on top of that, he had more rocks hauled in. We built our own frame, mixed our own concrete, had loads of sand brought in, mixed our own concrete by the bag, by the shovel, and poured concrete for heaven knows how long until we had a 12 by 12 foot foundation of stone and concrete built on top of this wet clay with a mixture of stone down the bottom. That was the basis for the camp. The camp was not going to be built on a foundation. The camp was going to be built on what we call puncheons. And we created a small pad of concrete at first and put puncheons. Eventually they were replaced with cages, which would have to be described, but cages are made with 8 by 8 beams about 3 feet long, and they're crisscrossed, and they can be readjusted each year with the frost. The camp settled on that for some years. Building the camp was a real interesting project, and now we're in 1959, and I had met this nice young lady in college named Yolande Lefebvre, and I invite her to come and spend some time and meet my parents. This was the first time. She is getting a little upset with me because I'm spending a lot of time constructing with Banan, my father, and this other gentleman, and she's spending her time on the beach. So I didn't get to spend all that much time with her, but a year later we decided that it was serious after I got out of college. But building the camp was a very exciting project. Here we are putting these walls log by log, crisscrossing the corners, and we have this whole plan, and the dream is starting to come true. 1959, camp is built, more or less completed. And of course the roadway, the roadway was something else, a distance of several hundred yards. Bana only has a 1957 beautiful black Ford, no pickup truck. And logs are being hauled out of the woods and rocks hauled in a trailer behind this car to build this roadway. That's the way we constructed this camp. And today it's a dream. It is thanks to Bana's creativity, his in hard work, dream. Bana was a good dreamer, but he had the know-how and willingness to make his dreams come true. I was probably offered a lot of labor, but I don't think I had that creativeness and I'm not sure what stamina to take a dream when you have no resources and still make it come true. And today, of course, we have a beautiful camp, which I'm sure Luke will span around the lake and from the boat take pictures of the front and the sides and the back and the top and the bottom.
This has changed.
It brings the whole family together. We all feel at home here. It is not any one particular person's home. Bana even created it so he didn't even make other people feel like it was his home and we were visiting. It is ours. It is all of ours.
Why do you think I come here?
Yeah, we all feel very comfortable. And so I married this young lady in 1960, Yolande Lefebvre. And together we had our own dreams and created 3 beautiful children. One of which is staring at me through a camera right now, Luke, our oldest one. He was a love baby, was born on our honeymoon, or created on our honeymoon. And
what does that make Guy and Julie?
they're love babies also. I remember each one of you, both from day 0 to year 42.
I think that's correct. The analysis is really nice, but there was a lot of heart there.
Yep. Oh boy. So my profession being coming from a family of educators, Adi and Imelda, Cecile, who taught grammar school for well over 30 years. Interestingly enough, I thought I was going to be one of the people in the family who was going to make some money. and thought I had a dream job in the mills of Madawaska. My education was into economics, and I thought I'd be work into personnel. I always thought I'd like to work with people. That job didn't pan out, and by accident, I won't go through all the details, but Yolanda and I were here right after our honeymoon. No job, living with mom and dad for a few weeks, and by accident somebody, or by, I don't know, divine creation, I can only tell you, someone came into the house and said they were looking for a math teacher in Fort Kent. That became my second year of teaching. I had taught at Higgins Classical Institute near Bangor prior to that, and taught in Fort Kent, Maine, and loved it, and decided that I needed to go back for more courses, and I loved math, so I went back to school to do math courses, taught 2 more years of high school math in Goffstown, New Hampshire, and then went off for a master's degree in mathematics at the University of New Hampshire, having taken courses both at Colby College and University of New Hampshire, and eventually later in New Jersey, and took on a job teaching college at New England College. And now I'm in my 38th year of teaching college, semi-retired, and spending some time teaching in other avenues. I'm teaching people about Rotary and all its good programs, about the good that it does both locally and internationally. So this is where I am at this stage of my life, a very happy person.
Absolutely beautiful.
Okay, now we're going to backtrack a little bit. Let me put this in pot. I wanted to talk about your experiences in the potato fields.
Oh my God. Oh,
Well,
we saw
we're on.
something in the potato fields that you'd never think you see here.
I mentioned earlier, none of us felt forced into doing anything, but we always felt that we were participants in this family, not just onlookers. So at an early age, in my case, 9 or 10 years old, followed Leopold in the fall to go pick potatoes. The farmers in Eagle Lake primarily could do it with local labor. Potatoes in those days, yes, there were farm tractors, but potatoes, after being dug by a tractor and, I forget what you call it, digger, potatoes would fall onto the ground and were all picked by hand. And people of all ages, families, many families, earned most of their finances for the year, picking potatoes for 4 weeks in the fall. And so Leopold, being 4 years older than I am, 14, God, he was barely in high school, high school, agreed to go with people who hire themselves out to farmers as managers of potato pickers. And we went to Fort Fairfield, Maine, again 50, 60 miles away from Eagle Lake, for a 4-week period, lived upstairs in a barn, unheated, with cot beds, male and female, different sizes of the room, but all in the same place. 15, 20 people, at least. No running water. Morning meant getting up 6:30 or so, going off next to the dining room where there were buckets of unheated water. Cold fall mornings, bar of soap, towel. Simply washed your face, went for a hearty breakfast, and then trucked to a potato field. You pick potatoes either bending over or hands and knees. I've had a bad back since those days, which is another story. And I would usually pick potatoes standing up, bending over for a matter of minutes, and then was always on my knees. We had padded knees that Mum would sew onto our dungarees. And of course they got very muddy, and they'd stay like that all week until you got them washed once a week. and pick a few barrels of potatoes in those days for 20 or 25 cents a barrel. I do not remember my record, but I do remember my brother Armin's record. Armin was an extremely good potato picker, and he would always strive to pick over 100 barrels a day. That's a lot of potatoes.
$25.
Barrels are I believe, either 3 or 4 bushels.
$165.
Yeah. And those were hauled away by truck. And that fall, that Leopold and I picked potatoes, I was not even in my teens. That money went to buy Dad some new teeth. That's how Dad got his new teeth.
No kidding. Oh, that's nice.
I did not pick potatoes too many years, and I would not do it now.
What caused you problems with your back? So that was the situation that caused problems with your back.
My back problems, I think, I might have had back problems anyway, but my back problems, I believe, were also coming from the time when I was less than a teenager, younger than a teenager. I mentioned earlier how Dad would bring railroad ties at home to build our septic system. He also brought railroad ties at home because they were free for heating the house. This was some of our heating lumber. And of course, if it was cedar, it made very good kindling. So he would bring several railroad ties. Again, I do not know how, if he brought them home on sleds. I know we did not hire too many people with trucks. We didn't do that. We didn't pay people to do anything. But the railroad ties got home somehow. And they were heavy. And Dad would decide on a place in the backyard where they would go. And then, of course, later in the fall and through the winter, we'd try to bring them closer to the house where we'd cut them with saws. Well, those saws didn't always last long, or Dad would have to sharpen them often because there was sand in those railroad ties. And we would cut them in 16-inch lengths and then split them. Well, and Dad would move them. Dad could do a lot of these things on his own. Dad was very creative. He would move a railroad tie. He would move a railroad tie by using rollers. He would move railroad ties by using rollers, and he could move them by himself with a roller and a peavey. Well, Leopold thought we'd have our own creative ways of moving railroad ties. And we'd topple them over end to end. And so at 8-foot lengths, you would move them 8 feet at a time. They were too heavy to carry. And one time, me being the younger one and the shorter one, we're lifting this railroad tie. Leopold is behind me, and we're trying to topple over, and he slips, drops it, and I bend over backwards. And it's not a pointing the finger or anything. It's just an interesting, pleasant reminder of who my brother is and the relationships that we had. We worked together, and whenever I have stress, it usually comes from stress, not so much from hard work, sometimes from hard work, but stress settles in my back, and I know I have a problem. Another interesting story that Leopold will tell you was how similarly working together chopping wood, that he chopped one of my sister's fingers off. Not quite totally off, but that's a story for him to tell. More to come later.
How does the top point?
She says, I'm going that way.
Tell me, I want to hear more experiences at the potato fields. You actually had potato wars with each other?
Oh, well, when the tractors, either tractors would break down or the diggers, there was a problem. They'd get jammed and they wouldn't work and so forth. Young people find ways to play. We get bored. We were not working. And so we find ways to play. And we cut small branches. Things that boys did in those days, we always carried knives. I still carry knives with a little knife with me today. And we'd cut these branches off willows or hardwood trees that were sturdy and yet flexible. We'd sharpen them up, and we'd take the little potatoes that we called gullos, and we'd have fights together. We'd just whip these at each other, hiding behind barrels. Crazy, but it was a game.
Did you ever get hurt by one?
Oh, I'm sure we got a few black and blue spots from whipping potatoes at each other.
I want to hang on, pause for a second. I'm gonna roll. So just tell me.
Leopold being the third priest in the family, he would have been in his 20s at the seminary in Montreal. And I now have a license. I'm a young person. And this is Mon oncle Bernard's 1957 black Ford, a beautiful car. And I have not had my license all that long. He can't make it to Canada for a celebration for Leopold, still in the seminary. So I drive Mom and Dad, and we go through Quebec and go all the way into Montreal, and Bernard trusted me. I don't know how good a driver I was, but he certainly trusted me by leaving me this brand new car in my hands with Mom and Dad. And we get into, I drive through all of Canada, mostly country roads, other than cities like Quebec, and get into Montreal, and we're barely arriving into the city. Now, Jean-Louis Jnicknair has not had much city driving experience. And we're not far from the seminary. And I have to stop at a red light, which I do diligently, but I had gone over the line. So I put the car in reverse to back up 3-4 feet. And I was not about to let the rest of the traffic get the best of me, and when the light changes, I step on the gas. The car is still in reverse. And I hit a car behind me and put a dent in Bernard's trunk. I feel terrible. I feel absolutely terrible. And I get out, and the person behind me says, "No damage to him, don't worry about it," you know. And so we continue on our way, feeling depressed at this point.
Now your folks are with you, right?
Mom and Dad are with me. Papa and Mama.
Saying?
Well, they're consoling, I guess, but also disappointed. Put a dent in Bernard's car. It's not my car. And I can't afford to pay for this. We get to the seminary, and of course the first thing that we tell Leopold is what happened. He says, "We'll take care of it." And during that day or next day, he found a garage. I believe he said they were Jewish folks who ran a business, and he says, "I hear they're some of the best, and they'll take care of you." They took this black car, took the dent out of the trunk overnight. We were staying there only a few days. Repainted the trunk. We did tell Bernard, but we never saw what had happened. He kept that car for a number of years, and they did an excellent job. My first accident.
All right, I wanted you to tell me experience, because we haven't really talked about Mary Paul. I was wondering how your experiences with her. If you have any.
Yeah, well, Mary Paul, again, Mary Paul is 9 years older than I am. Bernard's 10 years older than I am. And Mary Paul, from some of the things that I hear, being the youngest, I did not experience her childhood. But she was born a sickly person.
Yes.
To the point where I'm told that she was placed in a shoebox and placed in the oven. There were no incubators in those days when she was born, and Mom nursed her. And of all the members of the family, she was certainly as bright, if not brighter than most of us, but kind of a sickly person. And I suppose ended up with a lot of attention. Dad just, not that they didn't love the rest of us, but he just loved her. I guess because she needed so much care. And she grew up to be a rambunctious young lady. She was very bright, went through school with excellent grades, decided to join the Dominican Sisters, was educated at the Sorbonne in France, stayed there 2-3 years. And the Dominicans in those days were semi-cloistered, and you didn't get to see them very much. And when she arrived from France, I remember our whole family driving down again in Bernard's car, meeting her in Boston, and we could not see her right away. And when we did see her, we saw her in a meeting room in a parlor where she could see us and we could talk to her and we could hug her, but when it came time for mealtime, she could not eat with us. Semi-cloistered. And in fact, when Mama died, Mary Paul either could not or did not come to the funeral. In her younger days, before she ended up in the convent, she must have spent at least 1 year at home, or at least one summer that I remember of. Mary Paul was the epitome of cleanliness. First, on herself, she was a very beautiful young lady, but the house had to be kept meticulously clean. And so all of us, I remember her washing floors at home. We had linoleum floors, wood stoves, and we constantly had to truck in wood in and out. It was never dirty around that stove. And when she would wash and wax the floors, even when my father would come in from work, he had to take his boots off and walk in the house in stocking feet. That was unheard of in our family. But especially with cats and dogs, we always had cats and dogs. And but Mary Paul had a venturesome spirit and a great attitude in life. She, one of the things that we remember now, of course, is in her older years, playing cards. Oh, she loved to play cards. And even the way she mixes cards, Yolande just thinks of Mary Paul every time she does it, because that's the way Yolande, that's the way Jnicknair used to, Mary Paul used to love to mix the cards. It just was supposedly therapy for her.
Turn it around.
Turn it around. And whenever there is some need in our family, my wife Yolande thinks of Mary Paul and talks to her. Yeah, we remember Mary Paul as a free-flowing spirit, very bright young lady. She can't speak for herself today, but she did some school teaching. She became principal of St. Dom's High in Lewiston, Maine. In later years, she worked in the missions of Arizona with the Indians. And she came back. She constantly had health problems.
I visited her there.
Huh?
I visited
In her Arizona? Yeah, I never saw her in Arizona. And she came back and then worked with the elderly in the Lewiston, Auburn area. And died 3 years ago, I believe. February 14th.
Valentine's.
Yes. Manok Bernard's birthday. Interesting.
So I have, I want you to tell me your brief career in the military.
Oh, God.
And I want to hear two things. I want to hear the ice cream story, and I want to hear the I want to hear the toilet story.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Turn that off and... Wait. Oh, God. There are two different times. God.
I was down in Washington. Down in Washington one summer when you were there at the Marine.
Okay, camera's rolling.
While I was in college at St. Anselm's College between 1955 and 1959, on campus there was an Army Reserve training camp. And so not everybody joined, but I thought that'd be an interesting thing to do. And Dad had always said, now if you ever decide to be in the military, a good place to work is the kitchen. And so I joined the Army Reserves at St. Anselm's for 2 years at least, probably my freshman year. And so that meant meetings every week. You got to wear a uniform, and the good old Army uniform, and go for training. You'll learn about marching, of course, and you'll learn about rifles and taking them apart and shooting them and cleaning them. And then for, I forget if it's 1 or 2 weeks in the summer, we would go to Camp Drum, New York. And my way to get to Camp Drum, New York after we'd get home, of course, coming home on holiday, I would wear this uniform. Everybody thought I was in the military. Girls love uniforms. And so I'd go dancing downtown Eagle Lake in my uniform. And thought that I was pretty attractive. I would hitchhike from northern Maine into Canada, all the way up to northern New York and down to Camp Drum, New York. And during the year, while I was in college, I would take cooking lessons at Grenier Airfield from a gentleman who had been chef for Eisenhower in France. So that's to some extent where I started learning to do some cooking. And we would feed the military personnel on it was an Air Force base in Manchester. And in the summer, of course, I would then do cooking for the whole period at Camp Drum. And one of the experiences there were a number of people from St. Anselm's that we knew, and we'd all show up at the same place at Camp Drum. We all participate in cleaning the barracks and, of course, the bathrooms. And somebody thought they'd pull a joke on one of our young people, and they put peanut butter on a toilet seat. And right after they had been cleaned, and an officer came in to inspect and looked at this, and of course with an element of surprise, says, "What is this?" And one of the gentlemen who had done it went over and took his finger and put it in his mouth and says, "Shit, sir." Of course it was peanut butter. I can just see this officer trying to hold himself from laughing, but probably punish the hell out of him. So that was a story Luke wanted me to tell. I guess I tell some of these stories periodically. And
I'm gonna wait for the book to come back.
well, having gone through the Army Reserves, I then hear of a number of my friends that say, hey, the Marines in Manchester are holding open houses and they're recruiting for officers. This is now my junior year. And they said, you could probably make a career in the military, but it's got to be in the Marines. Well, again, I will have to admit to this day that I must have been taken by the uniform. Very proud of looking at Marines, sharp, hard-knocking people. And so I joined. Followed friends, I think. I don't know. I don't want to blame anybody else. My own dreams. So I joined the Marine Reserves, away from the Army Reserves. I dropped the Army, I go into the Marine Reserves, and I go to camp in Quantico, Virginia. And at that time, Dick Glennon and my sister Jackie are living in the Washington, D.C. area. Well, little did I know that the weather down in Washington and Quantico, Virginia is not like northern Maine or Camp Drum, New York. The summers are extremely hot, damp, and difficult. And you were in school in the area, I believe.
9 summers.
9 summers in the Washington area. And I'm doing my basic training, going through basic training all over again. Crawling in the mud, having bullets shot over you when you're crawling under wires, climbing walls, walking through rivers, hiking for several miles, blisters galore, pain, pain, pain. Also standing at attention on airfields, waiting for these big mucky mucks to come and, talk to us. And my back is acting up as well. But I feel proud. I'm joining the Marines. We're living in these barracks, going on hikes, and much as I had bleeding blisters, I never wanted to quit. But there's one officer, one of the things that the Marines do in their training, they try to break individualism down so that they can then build you into a team. And they'll do it all kinds of ways. And they'll do it even when you're so-called off duty. At nighttime, with this hot, hot weather, a few of my friends had asked me, there was an ice cream truck coming on base, and asked me to go buy them some ice cream or some cold things. And I come with an armful of whatever I'm carrying, it was only 50 yards or so, and change and money in my other hand. And whom do I meet but our officer in charge? I do a stupid thing. I grab everything, put it in my right hand, and I salute with my left. And he gives me a lecture about what I'm supposed to do. Turns out that I'm standing over a grate, a drainage grate with big, huge holes. And he says, "Is that how you salute an officer?" And of course I said, "No, sir." He says, "Salute the way you've been taught in the Marines." I drop everything. Change goes through the grate. Ice cream goes on the ground. I salute him properly. He gives me a lecture and keeps me there till the ice cream melts. And then sends me on my merry way. I can tell you that I'm a senior in college. I can tell you that I cry about other things, soft things and stuff, but I have been beaten down to nothing. And I cry. And I go back to the barracks and tell these guys this story. They take my side. They take my side. They said, "Forget about the money. Forget about the ice cream. We know about this BASTARD." Oh, boy. Well, eventually I came back to college and decided that I was not going to make a career in the Marines. I dropped them. Some stories I'm not sure I even want to recall. So you want to hear that, huh, Luke?
Yep.
How some people survive all of that? Some people have...
You understand what I went through when I sold out St.
Oh,
Francis College.
that must have been hard.
Same thing.
That must have been very, very
The
hard.
dirty work was mine. Everybody else was clean.
Yep. You still taping?
Yep.
Oh,
Okay?
That's it.
I think that's it.
Yeah, that's it.